Welcome to our next iteration of the Cinetopia podcast, where we're coming from our own home recording studios. If you haven't seen our show before, I'm Amanda, a filmmaker, and I run Cinetopia, which runs events and programs like this that aims to foster discussion around film and filmmaking. I'm back with Jim Ross, managing editor of Take One magazine and co-producer of the show. Hey Jim, how are you?
I'm good.
And we're joined with Elle Haywood, based in Beaconsfield. Elle, welcome. It's great that we get to bring people from outside of Edinburgh now that we're doing everything remote. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
So you've been working with Take One for over a year now, right?
Yeah, since I started writing for Take One as a student back in 2018, even 2017, I think. It's a long time.
Yeah, she's one of the lucky people that got to go to Cannes before it all got cancelled.
Oh, last year or years before? Or?
I think year before that.
2018, yeah. So it was a really good year to go. So feeling quite lucky and sad to be missing it this year.
Yeah, absolutely. So today on our show, we're going to chat about the opening of cinemas across the globe, how we feel about it and how you feel about it. We're going to review Ryan Murphy's new show, Hollywood, review the film Judy Punch, which was directed by Mirah Foulkes, and review the Icelandic film The County, which is directed by Grímur Hákonarson. Jim also sat down with Leah Sapin from the Human Rights Watch Festival, who has taken their UK festival and put it online, which will be available this week on May 22nd. All that plus our shorts recommendations on this episode. So, cinemas are opening in places like Texas, and they've been mentioning that in the UK they'd like to open some in July. So, wanted to ask you guys what you think about this. And I think, Jim, you gave a poll out to a whole bunch of people online on Twitter, and what were the responses to that?
Interesting. I was over 100 people, so it was a decent enough sample. But I'm not Ipsos Mori, so it was probably a fairly cinema predisposed group in the first place. I split it into different answers, like absolutely no questions asked. If cinemas reopen July, would you go back? Absolutely, probably with safety measures, probably not, or absolutely not. And basically, it was more or less kind of even for each answer. There's a slight edge to people who are not inclined to do so. Basically, if you end up looking at the results, it's about 20% would go, no questions asked. About 21% absolutely not, regardless of what is in place, and then 32% probably not, and 28% probably. So I would say there's not necessarily a huge amount of enthusiasm for it, but it does seem to be largely dependent on whether people feel it's safe or not. And I'm not my own personal opinion on it is I'm not convinced they will be. There's too many cinemas where it's just a bit of a weird architecture. I'm not really sure how you can put distancing measures in. I'm not sure how many screens are economically viable with reduced seating. So is it impossible? No. I'm not really sure the enthusiasm's there. And then you've got all the other kind of welfare issues on top of it of, the staff would need to clean the screens, is it responsible to be bringing them back? So I don't know. There's definitely a small appetite for it, but how feasible it is, I don't know.
Oh, what's your thoughts on it?
I mean, I'm personally not massively in favour of it, and I think a lot of the discussions, so I'm at a film school as well, so it's a very kind of prominent topic for us at the moment. I think the issue is it's very much like sports stadiums or anywhere else that has compact seating and stuff, is it's still turning people over. There's going to be a lot of people still coming in and out of the cinema. Are they going to have thermal cameras that kind of detect body heat, so if somebody's got a temperature. I think it's the trust that these safety measures are going to be upheld, and what of cinema staff as well. Very similar conversations to Jim. I think people want to go back to help cinemas because the film industry is really suffering under this pandemic. It's always been a financially kind of tricky industry anyway, but this pandemic isn't helping, and I think people want to go back to support cinemas, but at the moment streaming online is working as a good viability and a good alternative, people are picking up, and you can see stats across different players, from like the BFI player to Amazon to Netflix. It's all picked up massively, and that's helping to tide it over. The other issue is that loads of releases have had to be pushed back anyway, and the whole scheduling is up in the air, and kind of tiptoeing around a July release is a very anxious time for a lot of filmmakers, because it's the, oh my god, are we going to know at the last minute that we're suddenly going into screens, or are we going to do better by running it online because we know that we'll still get a bigger audience and it will get seen more, whereas if we exclusively put it in like a handful of cinemas, are you almost kind of potentially having the film flop? I think it's a very tricky one, but I mean, at least in the UK at the moment, it doesn't feel like a very supported measure. There aren't a lot of people who are like, yeah, we want to go back. I think everyone's feeling very cautious at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I think it's way too soon, at least in the UK, and I think safety first and all of that. But I do notice how, at least online, how or what I've seen in some of these, there's a really fascinating cinema summit that happens online on webinar. A bunch of whole cinema exhibitors get together and sort of talk about what's going on around the world. And they've been talking about how controversial this subject is, and it's really, really it's people are on either side, like really adamantly on one side or the other, which has been really interesting. And I also think it's this film, this Christopher Nolan, that's really hitting people, because is that why July is the time that everybody wants to open, because it's supposed to come out.
Are you sure you don't want to watch the future classic Unhinged starring Russell Crowe? I mean, I kind of thought that was the film that everybody was wanting to go back to see. No, it's Tenet. It's Christopher Nolan's one. Oh, okay, I see. Yeah, no, that is the film that everybody seems to be talking about, because it's the only major release which hasn't moved from its original release date. You know, I mean, everything else that would have made a load of money, like Black Widow, James Bond, Fast and Furious, like they've all been pushed back months, if not like a year. But that one, the Christopher Nolan film, is firmly where it was. How wise a decision that is, I don't know. I think it will get released on that date, because I think there'll be sufficient places in the States that will want to reopen, just because there seems to be plenty of craziness there in terms of wanting to get stuff restarted. So it will. I do think it will come out. What the situation is here at the time, I don't know, because I think it is too early for the UK. Doesn't mean somebody or some business, particularly in England, where it's changing at a slightly different pace to Scotland and the rest of the UK, whether somebody will try and open something, I don't know, but I'll be interested to see how it does, and I'll also be interested to see what measures places put in, because I'm just not convinced. I would like to go to the cinema. I would like to go see that Christopher Nolan film, and I think if there's any film which is likely to be around in July that would make me think, maybe I'll give this a go, it would be that. It's more just, I find it hard to figure out in my head whether it's a responsible path or not.
Does he have any say? I would assume he does, or have you read anything about that? Like, because they've asked him to halt it.
Nothing particularly reliable. I mean, I would imagine he probably does. I mean, he's in that category of director where I would imagine he's got quite a bit of clout over how things are released. You know, because it was the same with releasing stuff in IMAX and on 70mm. Like, you know, clearly he has some sort of say, and he would in normal circumstances. So I presume it must be if it does come out, I have to assume that even if he's not the one pushing it, it is happening with his blessing, at least. But I don't really know. But I mean, he's very big on the theatrical experience and all that. So,
but also I would imagine, though, for the distribution and marketing company behind it, is that they've got to be really careful about this, because if they come as like the film that people are going to go and see in cinemas in July, and then that seems to be a cause of this second wave, that's going to hit more people. Are going to be discussing that more than the actual film itself, of how this Christopher Nolan film caused a second wave because everyone went to cinemas to see it, and then suddenly we have to go back into lockdown. It's a very bizarre issue for them to kind of be struggling with, is that it could be a really negative marketing thing if it causes a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, one of the things I think you're studying film exhibition, correct, Elle, right?
Yeah, so my full course is film studies, programming, and curation. So the idea of programming film festivals, film seasons, different venues, film criticism. So it all ties in. So this is like it's a really interesting time to kind of be in like doing a master's in this subject when we've got a whole year of everything being different from the way it was. So it's almost a kind of a good case study year to be experiencing.
Yeah, I actually did a very similar course up in Edinburgh about 2 years ago, and we were talking about the Netflix and streaming and series and how this is just disrupting the industry. But now this disruption is really something like incredibly crazy.
I'm not. The only other thing I would add to that, I'm not convinced that some of this disruption will hold. I mean, it's something that we've kind of like spoken about offline, not on the show, but some of these premium rentals for like new releases, they are extremely expensive. I mean, like I realize if you're looking at like Trolls World Tour for like $20 or something. I mean, it's a family film, so if anything, that probably works out cheaper, right? But I'm thinking about films that we've reviewed on the show recently, even. I mean, they're costing 12, 13, even £15 or something to rent them, and that's rent them digitally, and then you're restricted by whatever equipment you're watching them on at home. That works right now because literally we do not have cinemas. But in terms of kind of and we've spoken on the show before, like I love stuff that makes films more accessible, and streaming does that, and that's one of the reasons that I think it has a major role to play in the future. I'm not sure how accessible that is and how much of a role that has to play if you're needing to pay £14 to watch something on your crappy laptop screen or however good a television you happen to be able to afford. Because if you live outside London, that is more than a cinema ticket. So in that regard, it is a little bit surprising to me that this is still getting heralded as the way forward. I'm not saying it can't work, but I do think the business model needs tweaked slightly if it's going to persist.
Yeah, and I mean, when you're talking accessibility, some people's access to the internet is minimal, and also understanding of using it, in terms of maybe people who are older and whatnot. But I think it is great that there's more accessibility, or there's more stuff out online, and it's continuing to get in certain parts. And I actually heard some people talk about that in terms of I live in an area that we don't get these kinds of films, so it's great that Curzon is doing day on date a lot of times anyway, and that's really fabulous. But I do think, as someone who wrote her dissertation on cinema as public space, it is an interesting thing that the conversation that's happening all over the world right now is how important cinemas were and are to our society, and everyone's dying to have that experience again. And then, as we interviewed last time somebody who did a drive-in experience, everyone's dying to have that experience again. And yet a couple of years ago we were thinking cinemas were dead. So I think hopefully that will remind people that the experience economy is something where we want to have a good experience and is so important, and we need to invest our $20 into that. That's my hope out of it.
Yeah,
it's a really positive aspect. It feels like everyone's kind of all coming together to say, oh, actually we really do appreciate the arts sector, we really want to kind of invest in it, this is very important, because everyone's at home. What is everyone doing? They're consuming music, they're consuming art, they're consuming films. It's suddenly an appreciation of, we need these things in our life to counteract kind of work and everything else. It's such a vital part. So that's a real silver lining, is it feels like although the sector is finding it tough and there's a lot of obstacles, it's a real kind of celebration of the arts sector, which is really nice.
Yeah, and just not just content that we're posting this on a podcast platform, but also YouTube, but not just the TikToks in the world, which are fun. And we're like, if I started to watch TikTok, I would not be productive whatsoever. So I have not done that yet. But
don't.
But it's really important to have a staged play and months and years of artists coming together, collaborating. And that's the best thing about filmmaking, is that it takes so many people to put that together, and generally a lot of money and a lot of creatives coming together on set, which is another thing what they're talking about, is creating these guidelines on how we can start filming because we're engaging and we're taking in all this content right now, but pretty soon we're gonna, even my reality shows that I not so secretly love, like, are gonna have had to stop filming, and I'm scared when I'm gonna see them again. Not only cinemas, but film festivals are a really big thing, for the industry, and we've seen Cannes had to cancel, and I think, Jim, you'll be talking a little bit about how, with Leah Sapin, about how film festivals have been able to evolve. But that's another experience of, getting to talk to, industry getting together. That's so important. And there's this conversation, oh, we can do this online now. And I fear that hopefully will not happen. I mean, I do think there's aspects that are useful because of environmental, too much travel and stuff, and maybe more accessibility. But, I don't know when you can start festivals again. I mean, they said that Sundance was the petri dish, perhaps, of the very beginning of this first wave of the pandemic. So, what do you guys think?
Well, I mean, in terms of networking opportunities, I suppose it doesn't affect me because I'm terrible at networking at film festivals. Unless I wrote about being there, you'd probably never know I went to them. I think it'll be a while before that can really begin again. Because I'm just looking ahead to, I mean, we're already in May, mid-May. So you've already had the Cannes Film Festival cut, which is usually kind of like the starter pistol for a lot of this stuff. I mean, Berlin managed to just sneak in there, basically. I don't know. I think it'll be quite a while, to be honest. Or if it does, it's going to be very stripped back. If you think about kind of like the big film festivals and the amount of queues that are at them, and the size of the theatres, and networking events, and marketplace browsing. That, like, I just don't. I don't see it. And then that combined with the amount of international travel that is needed, and I think it's going to be a while before international travel is not necessarily feasible, but even affordable. I mean, like, a lot of people have to spend enormous amounts of money to get to film festivals anyway, and that was before the airfares went up by a factor of 3 or 4. So it's more that there's so many different layers of things that have to happen. Yes, you can make an event safe, but then you need people to be able to travel to it safely. If they're going to travel to it safely, they need to be able to afford to travel to it, and all this sort of thing. So I think it'll be a while before it's back up full speed. I'll be interested. The one I've got my eye on is Venice. Like, that, I think, is maybe a key bellwether, just because of the timing. It's far enough ahead that maybe this is more feasible, but also the location. If something can go ahead safely in northern Italy in September, then yeah, we're maybe in good shape. I don't think that's going to happen, though, or at least not in any form that we recognise.
It's a similar thing. Like, I'm kind of keeping my eyes a bit more peeled, and like for London, for example, mainly because as the conversation we said earlier, if cinemas are opening up in London, that means the kind of set of film cinemas that are usually used for the festival are all in the same vicinity in like Piccadilly Circus and stuff. That's going to be interesting because for public attending the festival, it's not normally too bad. You kind of go as you go for normal cinema. For critics, we're all queuing up, like, everyone stands in a very kind of set line and stuff, and already first thing in the morning you can see it weaving all the way back to the tube station. So I think that's going to be one interesting to watch. And what's going to happen with international festivals, I think, for the beginning of the new year will be a real kind of herald of what is going to look like. And also, it's a massive deal for filmmakers because where they get their films ready to be made and setting which festival they want to go to will set the standard of what that film means. If this is for first-time filmmakers, this is a massive issue, because if they're missing out on hitting their film for Cannes, or they're hitting their film for Tribeca, or whichever one it is, if they're missing that festival, how is that going to affect the release of their films? And it's a big worry that having to shift it, and which films will then, all the films that can, are they going to get their releases pushed back to another festival? What's going to happen? It's going to be a big conversation of how the premiere status of films are treated. And also, it's going to be really interesting that on May 29th, the We Are One festival kicks off, which is the online festival of, I think it's pretty much everyone from Cannes to London to Berlin to Toronto, Mumbai, New York. Everyone's coming together for this online festival, and in a way that's going to promote film festivals to the public, and a reminder that it's not just critics and the cast and stuff who attend film festivals, it's actually open to the public, which not a lot of people realise half the time, especially in London. So now that we're publicising film festivals all together online for the people who can watch this all for free, are we suddenly going to see a rise in attendance over the next year now that people know about it? It's going to be one to watch.
Yeah, I mean, I'm that's an interesting point. I wonder if it's going to, with all the other stuff that's online, if it's really going to reach out to a massive, large audience about, you know, that's not already eagerly interested in film festivals. But that's a really good point. I mean, I also think of this idea, like what you said, how important this is to the filmmaker. I mean, there's not only like the last Edinburgh International Film Festival, I went to a lot of industry events, and they talked about this multiple year trajectory of how your film gets, you know, distributed or how it gets made, and it starts at a film festival. A lot of times in these conversations, in these industry events where you're connecting and networking with people, and I think bringing up that idea of networking, you know, we ran a networking event last week just to see how we could do it online, but the ability to connect with filmmakers that potentially could be your collaborators or your producers or your funders. These film festivals are really, really important parts of the networking experience of who you get to meet, and it kind of helps the film start to begin sometimes. And it also, obviously, if you get the opportunity to show your film at a film festival, it's the middle point of the trajectory of your projects. So we hope to continue to report on this and see what happens, and that we're very keen what's going to keep going on. So next up, we're going to review the new series on Netflix, Hollywood, which was done by Ryan Murphy. Supposedly, Ryan Murphy has given $300 million from Netflix to carte blanche. And this is one of the things he started to come up with.
This town's all about dreams. And some of my customers don't just come here for gas.
What's the password again?
Dreamland.
Dreamland.
I want to go to Dreamland.
You get in the car with them, have a drink maybe. You know, sometimes you have to service them.
No, I came here to be a movie star.
And Jim, do you want to give a little overview of the series?
So the series is centered on the sort of the golden age of Hollywood. So post-war, and it basically follows a group of young creatives trying to make it in Hollywood. Effectively, the main person that we follow at the start is a young hopeful actor called Jack Costello, and he has moved to Los Angeles with his wife and is looking to make it as an actor. I think we meet him in the initial stages when he's outside Ace Studios trying to get cast as an extra. So it follows him and various other characters in trying to make it, and in particular, as the series develops, get a film made. And it tries to have a bit of a comment on how accessible Hollywood is and some of the challenges that people face, even to this day, through the lens of that period. Now, as the series goes on, this isn't really much of a spoiler because I think this has been written about quite a bit. As the series goes on, it starts to go into kind of like an alternative history type route. So there are fictional characters in this. There's Archie, the screenwriter. There's Camille, the actress who is in a relationship with the director of this film that develops, and then obviously Jack, as I've mentioned. In between there are real life characters mixed in. So in particular, there's quite a prominent role for Rock Hudson, played by Jake Picking, who very famously was a closeted gay man throughout his career. It didn't come out until he died that he was homosexual, and that is not the case in this series. It kind of looks at a relationship he has with a fictional man and kind of how that then plays into it. And then there's kind of an antagonist role for Jim Parsons of Big Bang Theory fame. He's playing a sort of an agent and producer called Henry Wilson, who was very infamous for being a very disagreeable character, shall we say, and really kind of taking advantage of a lot of his clients and, you know, blackmail and, all sorts of shady dealings to get what he wanted in the industry. So basically it follows that story. It follows this kind of like this group of young creatives who, for various reasons, whether it's sexuality, race, various other reasons, encounter quite a lot of barriers in the industry, and it follows them through the making of this film right up to basically at the end an Academy Awards ceremony. So that's basically what it does. It's quite lavish, it's quite soapy, and yeah, that's really what it does. I'm interested to see what you folks made of it, because it's not. I have thoughts.
I'm sure you have thoughts.
Yeah.
And reading the critics' different reviews that I had seen, as I was watching the series, I was just dying to see what people were writing about. I think there's been a lot of negativity in terms of like critical review of this. Not to say that I think that I personally think that there's flaws, and it's sometimes I was enjoying it and sometimes I was getting into the story, and I think it particularly had to do with some of the actors. Like, I really love Patti LuPone, and she plays this really obviously some really big actors who are there. Queen Latifah is playing Hattie McDaniel, and you have Mira Sorvino, and so there's some really amazing. There's an amazing cast, and putting them in these lights and this kind of 40s background, and it's quite lavish and fun. So some aspects it was fun to be in that space for a bit, but sometimes the dialogue and some of the acting was quite hokey, and it
Quite hokey.
Great. Yeah.
Quite hokey. Is that an American quite or a British quite?
It's probably in between, because I've lived here for a couple of years now. So I would just say that my dislike of it is way less than perhaps what I've read from critics like RogerEbert.com. I don't remember who it was, gave it like a 1 star, but then gave Tiger King like 4 stars, and it's just, to me, is it really that bad? That's my first impression. So I'd like to hear what you guys think.
I mean, I've watched only a handful of episodes, so I think my view on it is only to an extent. But it's a really bizarre one, seeing how much the public have lapped it up. But I think what it does very well is that it's got the Ryan Murphy stamp all over it, like it's how much influence from Glee and American Horror Story you can see it like wiped all over it. It's got that typical thing where the characters are like kind of presented and they're glossy and they're shiny and you're kind of interested in it, and he teases you into a little bit of the backstory but then kind of sweeps them away, skipping down into whatever happens in their story next. And it doesn't quite get to the depth that it should do, because it's a really pivotal time post-World War II in cinematic history. And it's made to seem like, the land of hope and dreams, and it gives back the audience their perception of how Hollywood is. They think it is still kind of glitzy and glamoury, and it doesn't delve into the issues of how a lot of people are struggling with money at the time. It kind of, when he's looking to kind of get a mortgage and stuff at the beginning, it kind of tiptoes towards it, and then it's like, okay, now on to the next thing. And I think that's where critics are kind of very dissing of it. They're like, for someone who's been given the budget and dealing with a really important storyline, they're not going quite into it. And it's a shame, because I think Ryan Murphy, especially when looking at queerness in cinema, he's been a really important voice in it, especially in TV shows and stuff. And I just feel it like lets it down a bit. And also they had like David Klotz in with who was, I think, did the music editing on it. It does that really clever thing where he worked on like Stranger Things, Iron Man, Game of Thrones, so he's a really notable editor. And what happens is the music carries along the storyline. Every time you think you're going to have a second to think about it, you're like, right, here's this lovely, brilliant jazz, it's uplifting music, you feel really good listening to it, and you start to lose the focus away from it. So I think it should have been done better by somebody who's got the ability to tell this story, and it just doesn't quite work, which is a real shame.
Yeah, it's because I'm kind of divided, even in myself on this, in that I don't think this is normally my cup of tea. I don't think it's all that amazing. I think it's got some good performances in it. I think it's got some very hammy ones as well, which are, and some that are just really not that great. It also falls into that trap of, generally when you're watching a TV show or a film where they're producing a TV show or a film within the TV show or the film, they always uniformly look dreadful, right? This doesn't change that at all. the main thing for me is that as the story progresses and you get into this alternative history, and this is the only part where I have a real issue with it. Beyond that, I think it's quite a well made thing. I think it looks very good. You know, it's got a lot going for it. And in particular, I actually think Jim Parsons as Henry Wilson is superb. I actually think he's really quite good as this really skeevy guy. It's excellent casting against kind of like what you would probably consider his type, and I think he does an excellent job with it. That being said, as the story starts to progress, these characters come up against, more barriers, right? So you've got Laura Harrier playing Camille Washington. She's an African American woman looking to get cast in the lead role in Hollywood in the 40s. Naturally, there are barriers there. You've got the screenwriter Archie, who they want to take his name off the script because they don't want the audience to know that the script was written by a black man or it'll get boycotted. All these sort of things going on. My issue with it is, as this progresses, these barriers kind of melt away a little too easy. Now, that's not me saying that, that it needs to, present some grand struggle or something. But I actually think it kind of does a disservice to the people who put up with this in real life, quite frankly. There's one scene where, spoiler alert, Camille Washington, right, the actress who's in the film within the film, she is nominated for an Oscar towards the end of the series, and she goes into the theatre to attend the ceremony, and as a black woman, she is denied entry to the theatre. And this is wiped away in the space of, 2 minutes just by the character standing their ground a bit. And, famously, so you mentioned, Queen Latifah is playing Hattie McDaniel. That's quite famously what happened to her, right? She won an Oscar and wasn't allowed to be in the ceremony kind of before and after to actually attend it because of segregation. And it's just a case of, it doesn't really end up saying much about these things. It doesn't really end up saying much beyond, this is dreadful. Wouldn't it be great if it wasn't like that? And I was like, well, yeah, it is dreadful. It would be great if it wasn't like that, but it doesn't really do much to kind of delve into kind of what effect that maybe had on the people who have gone through this sort of thing. So that's kind of my issue with it as it progresses. It tries to start adding meaning to it with that sort of thing going on, but I'm not really sure that it actually achieves that. I think it ends up with a fairly shallow representation of those issues as a result. And then, of course, part and parcel, this, as you can guess, is probably the idea of Rock Hudson's sexuality plays into this, and the characters are all kind of, they kind of come together because they're working at this gas station, which is basically a front for a male prostitution ring, effectively, and it has knock-on effects there. It's just it's nice, but it's nice in a way that is quite shallow, and I think trivializes quite a lot of issues. That's my major issue with it. But the thing is, that doesn't really surface, in my opinion anyway, it doesn't really surface until the latter half of the season when it starts to go into this, this kind of what-if scenario. So for me, it has its plus points, but it became a little bit more trite as it went on, just because I don't feel it added a whole lot of depth to those issues and scenarios, really.
I don't think it trivializes it, in its intent at all. I think in a lot of ways that it's this, that the premise I think it perhaps trivializes it to you because of its execution. So it certainly didn't, I think the premise was to create this counter history tale, to tell a story that, is a wish fulfillment fantasy. In a lot of ways, you think of things like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood or even Inglourious Basterds as taking stories or taking history and kind of reframing it how they want to frame it. But this one's done in a positive way, and I think that that's something because it's all positive and kind of again hokey or something like that, and it's being panned by critics, but people are enjoying it. It's a popular show. It's a show that is for a lot of people, and people are enjoying it, and they're not seeing it that way. And I think there's a reason for that. And I don't necessarily think it's done with great execution for those reasons you've mentioned, but not necessarily trying to trivialize something. Like, I love some of these lines, you know, that are coming out, you know, from Patti LuPone about, like, you know, I ran a studio, now I'm making you dinner. And she, you know, like, there's some really great one-liners, and like you said, like, Jim Parsons' character is just is incredibly fun, and I really love this conversation of the producer in quotes, because it's still conversations you have. But you know, I don't think it's as bad as everyone's making it out to be, but that's my opinion.
I guess like one of oh, sorry. I guess like it's a very, I do find it a little bit trivializing in the fact there's a bit of an infantilization of the audiences. It could go further into exploring these issues and the emotions. It's just another case of, there's some really important subject matter. You should be like discussing the issues at hand a lot more, and you should be looking into the people who went through those experiences and actually kind of giving them the proper voice that they deserve. I think what he's done is he's brought about loads of great conversations, and people are probably enjoying it because they're seeing it kind of a bit. They've kind of been giving tidbits and an idea of it and letting it run like another glossy Netflix show. And the problem there is you are once again kind of pushing down the really serious issues there are at hand. And it's a subject matter that deserves to have better voice to it. Like, the characters in it, they deserve to, if you're kind of giving an alternative version of history, do it with some other characters. Don't do it with the real people who kind of live through those things and not giving their voice justice for what they kind of had to go through and what they fought for at that point in Hollywood. Like, it just, yeah, I think the execution makes a big difference in terms of, yeah, if you're going to be telling these stories, tell them with a bit more authenticity, or tell them with a voice that you think they deserve. Like, make it a little bit more hard-hitting at the expense of making it a little bit less shiny and kind of glossy. Like, so many filmmakers are afraid of really getting into the matter by thinking the audience are going to be turned off by it, and it's like they're not. There is a real palette for kind of serious discussions about how history treated a lot of people in cinema at that point.
Yeah, but I would also argue, we talked about this a little bit with, like, Tiger King. You know, it wasn't the hard-hitting documentary about a very, you know, terrible thing that's going on, but it brought up subject matters that were, you know, engaged a larger audience. I'm not sure that this was ever intended to be a hard-hitting, you know, it's just to bring up conversations, or again, to create a counter-history tale in which disempowered people... Well, no, but the disempowered people have power, and, you know, it's in that way that wouldn't have happened and didn't happen and still doesn't happen. And if you add the hard hitting, then it's a different show, which, you know, it could be a great film, could be a great show, but it's not this show, you know.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure how much I agree in the sense that yes, it does become a different show if that's the situation that you actually, or the way in which you execute the ideas, right? The thing is, though, it makes, my issue is by overcoming these barriers easily within the story or through some weird plot contrivance, of which it has a few, right? My issue is it then, to my mind, minimises the very thing that it's wanting to draw attention to. That's my issue with it. And I appreciate that maybe it becomes a less accessible film, or series in this case, because of that, because you don't necessarily have those moments of triumph. But at the same time, it does minimise it. And I go back to that comparison when we were reviewing The Assistant, where you look at a film like Bombshell versus The Assistant, right? They're dealing with very similar things, but the other one is glossier, it's shinier, and people either overcome things or they just forget about them in the background. And as a result, I think it minimises the issue it brings up. To my mind, Hollywood is doing a similar thing. And I suppose what I'm getting at is I don't feel you can address those issues that it clearly wants to, because like the latter half of the season is basically fully related to those aspects. I don't think you can do those if you're going to execute them like that. If you want to produce a glossy series about Hollywood in the 40s, then do that. And then if you're going to say that you just want it to be diverse, then just have it diverse. I mean, and like have no regard for history and just kind of like try and luxuriate in the setting and the atmosphere. But if you are going to tackle these issues, I think you need to tackle them better than Hollywood did.
Well, yeah, I disagree in the sense I don't think this was it completely well executed. So I'm not going to stand by this show saying this was a great show that did everything it should have done, for sure. And I think when you look back at it, or maybe there could be a season 2 where maybe they improve upon some of those things that, you know, rightfully are being criticized, because I think all these points are completely valid. I do think that there is a space where you could have something like this that was a little bit more positive in trying to create this counter history tale, and I think that's the premise is there is a possibility of that to work. There's lots of possibilities in making shows and films. It just wasn't done completely effectively.
Yeah, I think like to finish off like with another analogy, like in terms of like if you want to try and have diverse characters, let's say, like one series that actually comes to mind is another Netflix one, is actually Sex Education. Now, and that to me, like I find it a very strange show at first, because it's kind of this weird kind of amalgam of an American school in Britain, and like the cast is very diverse, probably more diverse than the semi-rural setting in Britain it seems to be set in. But because they generally create the characters quite well and you're invested in their dynamics, it doesn't matter. It's more like you're invested in those characters. I think Hollywood tries to get you to invest in the issues that those characters face rather than the characters themselves. And therefore, that's why, to me, the execution is off. Because if your investment is not in the characters, but it's in the issues, then you need to deal with the issues correctly. If you're going to ignore them, that's fine. I mean, there is a place for that where you're not trying to make comments on that. But in that case, the character work needs to be a lot better than it was in Hollywood, in my view.
Yeah, I agree with that. The character work, especially with some of the main characters, was not incredibly something I enjoyed, or I've really followed, or really felt for. So on that, we let you watch it and see what you think, and let us know. Film that we're going to review is Judy and Punch, which is a fictional origin story of the British traditional puppet show Punch and Judy.
Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Punch!
I'm an artist. The greatest puppeteer of his generation.
It seems some folk are getting squeamish around here.
So, Jim, tell us a little bit about the film and what you thought about it.
So this is quite a strange one, I found. We'll discuss in a minute, but basically, where we open in the town of, I think it's called Seaside, a fictional place, which seems to be in some pseudo-medieval time in some indeterminate location. I think Mirah Foulkes in the production is Australian, but, you know, there's a whole variety of accents kicking around this place.
Australia, I think it was.
Victoria.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And basically we find ourselves with Judy, played by Mirah Foulkes, and Punch, played by Damon Herriman, who most people might have actually recognised for he was playing Charles Manson in Mindhunter, and I think also Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. He's been in a whole bunch of stuff, but that's a recent thing. And they are playing the title pairing of Judy and Punch. And basically the entire town is very into their puppet show, which basically appears as kind of like the classic Punch and Judy show that we see. The relationship is clearly a little abusive. It's not quite sunshine and light, shall we say. And basically you have this situation where Punch is kind of basking in the glory of this show and the adulation he's getting, but the actual talent behind it is Judy, and she's not really getting the due credit. I'm not going to give too much away, but I mean, if you've ever seen a Punch and Judy show, you know that it's actually quite violent in its own way. So needless to say, that kind of plays into it, and as we say, we kind of get this like live action dramatization of that relationship in the context of this very meta thing with the puppet show. So I'm very interested to see what you thought, because there's bits I like about this film, there's bits that I didn't feel quite worked. I think it's a very interesting film though, particularly in kind of like a lot of stuff it deals with. So what did you guys make of it?
So it was a weird one. Anything that Mirah Foulkes is in, I'm usually quite interested in, because it's kind of very surreal, and she is exceptionally headstrong. As any character she plays, she's very headstrong, she's kind of very profound, very feminist, and she's also very kind as well. She embodies so many great values. And in a film that deals with a lot of violent subject matter, I think she takes this on really, really well. And it's almost a very kind of Me Too-esque film, because everyone knows like Punch of Judy, it's back to 16th century Italy, and basically Punch bludgeoning everyone's death half the time. So it's interesting how it takes a very kind of violent historic story that they wanted to set it in a very European context despite filming in Victoria and Australia, and how they deal with the fact that it's like puppet shows have always been a big entertainment factor for audiences, and that kind of violence in arenas has always been a interesting subject matter. And it's how you find how Mia's character kind of, as Judy, kind of find this empowerment in this very kind of slightly misogynistic and violent setting, and it's very mystical, it's very hazy, and I don't know, I enjoyed it, but then I didn't enjoy it at the same time. I think there's elements of it that just, it's uncomfortable to watch at times, and it's very brutal, and that's kind of how you feel about it. You're about like, oh, this is just not nice to watch, but then the way that they interact with each other as well is also really fascinating. So it's one of those typical films where I'm a bit like, I don't know if I'm like what I'm watching, but it's a really brilliant film.
Yeah, I mean, I agree in the sense that there's parts of it I really enjoyed, and I don't know enough, I've never seen a Punch and Judy puppet show, so, and didn't really know necessarily the history of that and like British culture and like by the seaside and whatnot, but I did find, I found it an interesting thing, again, taking some sort of classic sort of story and then revisiting it with a new perspective, and I thought that part of it worked well, perhaps much better than what we were talking about with Hollywood, but the other parts were just a bit bizarre. It was just how it was a bizarre film to be talking about domestic violence, and sometimes I just didn't find that those conversations matching, perhaps the same way that we were discussing in our previous review. Jim, how about you?
Broadly, I liked it. There are bits of it that I feel don't work. I think one of the things that it just about pulls off, right? It doesn't quite, but I think one of the things it nearly pulls off is the tone, and it's a very weird tone it's trying to balance, right? Because there is a dramatic impulse here. There is quite a lot of brutality, as Elle said, in particular. I mean, let's be quite clear, right? If you've ever seen a Punch and Judy show, right, you know that at some point in this film, Judy's going to get beaten up, right? That is not pleasant. At the same time, it does have this kind of like this strand of dark comedy going through the whole thing, just in the way that kind of like the local community try to pin the violence on, like random people who really have nothing to do with it. Just kind of like this ridiculous kind of like thirst for violent justice that the town seems to have. There's this kind of element of dark, kind of like gallows humor, almost quite literally, going through the whole thing, and I think it does that quite well. And it reminded me of like some classic British TV series. Like, it was actually quite Blackaddery at points, just in kind of like some of the way it tries to deal with some of the humor there. And I think it doesn't quite manage to gel kind of like the drama and the brutality with that perfectly, but I think it did by and large a pretty good job. Where it starts to go a little bit off the rails is a little bit towards the end, where I think it starts to go for this like hyper real feel, and that's kind of there throughout, but it in particular tries to go for it towards the end. There's one scene in particular where, without giving too much away, like somebody kind of like rides in on a horse and flies off, and it just looks ridiculous. Like it looks, to me, it looked silly, right, and not in a way where it kind of like married up with it. So I enjoyed it. I think Mirah Wasikowska's performance is very good. I think kind of like this little community of people she finds herself in from about a third of the way through the film to the end is also very interesting. I think Damon Herriman's performance is one of kind of like this ridiculous, arrogant hubris, and the way that he kind of believes his own press almost, and the way that he gets found out. I think that's also a very interesting performance. I think it's well done. And I think the ridiculous, amped up humour aspects, by and large, work. I just think it's just a case of it. I just feel like it needed like one more go round in the edit suite, or one more go round in the script, and it could have maybe blended its different elements a little better. So broadly speaking, I liked it. I liked what it was trying to achieve, and I think it does quite a good job, but it just doesn't quite balance all the different aspects for me. I think it could have woven them together with a little more. I don't want to say skill, because I think it takes a lot of skill to get it to the point it's already at, but I think it's more just it doesn't quite reach the level it wants to.
The one thing I do really love about it though is the way it's shot. It's Stefan Ducio's cinematography, and he's got such a brilliant eye for kind of slightly aged films, because he uses a really specific film grain, and they use really old the oldest version of cameras they can get, because they really wanted to shoot it on film to give it a much more kind of authentic, grainy feel, and that's what works so much with kind of slightly kind of medieval style filming, but instead like used a really clever pattern of layering and stuff, and so visually it works well. And also he's worked with Mirah a lot before, and so those relationships actually make it look quite stunning, and that kind of does work for me. It's one of those films that stylistically is quite enjoyable to watch.
Yeah, I would agree that it is very stylistically beautiful to watch. And I think I've said this in the past with some other, I believe this is the first feature for the director, and I think it was Beats, where there was a lot of, this didn't work perfectly, or this didn't work perfectly. When it's a first feature and it's this high a quality, and yeah, maybe it needed a little bit of work on in the edit room. I mean, that's really fabulous. It shows that we can expect great things from this director, and I think I just maybe read something right before watching this about like the history of public shaming, and I do think that was so part of a really well done sort of like theme that went on in this town that was just quick to shame women and these old these people. And then there's this one, maybe I'm just really into earnest things right now because I liked Hollywood for its earnestness, but the constable character, like every time you found him in the crowd, I was just really engaged with that character, because it was the light in the in the crazy world that was this seaside town that isn't on this seaside, so also bizarre. But there's some other little bizarre moments that I just wanted to pull out that were fun, like the Tai Chi like in the woods, and there were just these kind of segments that kind of took you away, and that Yorgos Lanthimos kind of, I don't know, way to me, where I was like, oh, this is fun, and it's it's a new film. It's not it's doing something different and bizarre, and I'm liking where it's going. So I think it's worth the look, and I think we all do here. So give it a whirl and let us know what you think.
Hvenær fórum við síðast í frí? Það eru 3 ár.
All right, so the next film we're going to review is The County. So Elle, why don't you tell us a little bit about this film?
So The County is by Icelandic filmmaker Grímur Hákonarson, whose last film was Rams, which was debuted at the Cannes Centre Regard in 2015. And The County follows similar lines of it's based on Icelandic sheep farming, and this film in particular looks at Inga, who has her and her husband have a farm out in Iceland, and they trade solely under a co-op. Now, the idea of a co-op system in Iceland was kind of developed out of kind of protest against the big corporations and kind of big brands in Reykjavik in centre. So this tiny village, they all kind of trade within this co-op system. However, it's very corrupt, it's very capitalist because of the leaders in charge. It's a bit of a spoiler, but it starts at the very beginning of the film. Is after the death of her husband, which is under quite mysterious circumstances. Inga, as an underdog character, kind of fights up against this co-op, and in her kind of protest tries to rope in other farmers, to kind of, so that it's a celebration of kind of bringing together kind of the farming community, celebrating local produce, and it's a really great discussion about Icelandic culture in the modern day and how that works for a lot of farmers out in the kind of very rural kind of Icelandic wilderness. And it was premiered at TIFF in 2019. So yeah, I was a big fan of this. I'm always here for Scandinavian kind of social realism. It brings about some fantastic discussions, and Inga, who's played by Arnis Thron Elgadistor, kind of really fantastic actress. Kind of there's a lot of potential with her, and it's a very kind of feminist film that looks at her vulnerabilities kind of around the death of her husband and kind of going up with this kind of very male dominated corporation. So it's very kind of protest and kind of sentimental at the same time. And yeah, keen to hear what you guys think.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, this certainly, I think there's always one film or show that really stands out in our week, and this one was that for me. And I particularly, I think last time we discussed Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, and there was something about the way that there was less dialogue than you would expect, or less drama in it but because it was concise, you could really feel the emotions of these actors, and that particularly with the main character of this film, I think happened, and I really felt for her story and her plight, and sometimes her willingness to spray milk on the co-op. That was one of my favorite parts, But yeah, it was a really great film. It was beautiful. It was really well acted, and and dealt with serious issues. So highly loved it. Jim?
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I think this is the thing that I seem to keep coming back to, right? When we talk about these films on the show, and it's the same with Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always on the last show, and various other ones. The best films, particularly these ones which are telling small personal stories, it's just a well-told story. I mean, and like the acting is excellent, and it really brings you into the character of Inga and kind of like the emotions that she's going through. And part of that is the performance, obviously, but the rest of it is the actual direction of the actors themselves. And there's loads of little touches here, much like, as I say, the film we spoke about on the last show, where you just get that sense of what is happening. And one bit that really stood out to me, is such a little thing, is Inga's talking to her children about the father's death. And it's just this lovely moment where she tells them something about it, and they just kind of like, they cover their mouth kind of in shock, but they both do it in unison. It's like, it's just... And it's these wonderful little moments that make it so well pitched and so well realised in terms of the characters and the story that they are inhabiting. On top of that, there is also kind of like certain unique slants to it, in the sense that this sort of story, this the David versus Goliath thing, right, comes up quite a lot. And I mean, if you were to think about kind of a woman going up against corporate entities, and the one that everybody goes to in their head, of course, is Erin Brockovich and things like that. But I think that story's popped up a few times. But what's quite interesting about this one is it also brings a little bit of that kind of Scandinavia. I mean, I realize it's Iceland, so we're probably stretching the definition of Scandinavia at this point, but that kind of like that Nordic kind of like slightly bleak tone, but yet there's just this element of like weird humor to it. And I think like the milk spraying scene that Amanda mentioned, that's something that would, to me, fit in alongside that. So that's where, in contrast to, let's say, Judy Punch, which I think I think generally we seem to be sort of like reasonably on board with. But this is a good example of when it balances that tone really extremely well. I think this film goes between, like, I don't want to say corporate, but kind of like business intrigue, personal drama, some slight kind of like dark humor as well, and it weaves between them very, very naturally, just as the characters themselves do. You know, they can go from despair to determination, and it all feels very natural and works very well. And I think a lot of that comes down to the way the film is shot, in terms of it's got that quite naturalistic feel to it, but also it knows when to make it more tense. And it reminded me of The Insider at one point. There's this scene where kind of like, you know, some co-op goons try to basically intimidate Inga, and it reminded me of a lot of films that I like, but also it brings its own unique tone and style to the table. And I think this is one where I think it's executed well, and it's just a very well told story.
It's interesting because I saw another film last year that was Icelandic called Woman at War, that was also about a woman sort of taking on the environmental issues and taking on the system and being, you know, ostracized in Iceland. So when I first saw this, I was like, wow, there's a lot of Icelandic films about the, you know, one woman against the country. But I thought this one was way better, again, in this tone that was sort of heartfelt and, you know, and social realism, like you mentioned, and I enjoyed that than the quirkiness of Women at War, even though Women at War was fun and, you know, it was a totally different take. But it was interesting to see they both kind of came out around the same time.
Yeah, because I saw Women at War, and it kind of I think it leans on the comedic aspects more. But I think that I agree with you in that this is better. It's got a slightly different tone, but it balances those aspects better than I think Women at War did. You know, but it's a very apt comparison. They are very similar in that regard.
It's a great demonstration as well of what can just be a good story on a very simple premise. It's about farmers and farming in Iceland. It's a very normal life story. It's looking at people's kind of work habits. You see her like mucking out on the farms to, very amusingly flinging cow dung at people who doesn't quite agree with. And it has got a really funny tone to it, but it's really kind of just subtle. It's that sort of kind of sarcastic nature to it, to kind of really fed up with just the way things are going, but a real kind of foolhardy, like going out and actually doing something. And the fact that they kind of bring in social media to like a very rural community, and how she kind of takes to Facebook for her protests, and is like, she does that very kind of great hesitant moment of, oh, do I send that, do I not? But it's not in a kind of a cheesy way. It's very like, all right, I'm going to do this, see what happens, and then deals with all the consequences in a very mature way. But also it's really subtly kind of, it's very, even not subtly, it's very profoundly brave in the terms of, to get this equality for all the other farmers, it means risking her own livelihoods, and whilst also managing with her children, with her grieving, keeping the farm running. It shows this great multitasking of women in it as well, and I think it's just a great subject matter, and it's highly relatable. And you see Icelandic films are becoming much more popular with an international audience because of the way they tell really great relevant stories to a lot of people and a lot of emotions you can identify with. But that's really interesting as well, and you're like, okay, that was a really good film, and that's what I think a lot of people are looking forward to. Just, they want it to, there's so many films that are very hard-hitting, very super emotional, or very showy and very shiny, and this is just a really great story that's funny yet sincere, and it just, I just really enjoy it, and I think that Grímur tells it brilliantly. And also getting Valgeir Sverrisson, who's a really famous Icelandic composer, which makes the score beautiful as well. I mean, Iceland is this sweeping great expanse, and kind of getting to highlight the rural villages through this like a beautiful melodic composition. It's just, it brings it together really nicely. It's a big fan.
Yeah, there's There's, as I say, it's just there's some good visual attention to detail as well. I mean, like, I'm sure you could talk about the way it kind of like frames a landscape when she's out looking at things, and just the way it deals with kind of like confrontations between the characters. But even just I think back to the start of the film where it goes to great lengths in kind of establishing shots to put an emphasis on the sort of the mechanized milking system for the cows, right? And it's only when you get later into the film that that actually starts to play a part in the plot, and you realize that actually that was very good, kind of like like Chekhov's milking machine, basically. Like it was doing this setup very well. So it's a very well told story. It's got good acting. I like the things it's trying to communicate, and the issues that kind of like form the foundation, if you like. But it's just a very well executed film, and I think it balances all its different elements really pretty well.
And when does that come out, Jim? Do you know, or is it already out on video on demand?
It's going to be out on May 22nd on Curzon Home Cinema.
Okay, May 22nd.
So I'm here with Leah Sapin, who is Associate Director, Programming and Production at the Human Rights Watch Film Festival. And we thought it'd be a good idea to talk to her ahead of the festival going digital with its London edition, which was curtailed early in the year. Leah, where do you find yourself at the moment, and how are you getting on?
I'm actually in Cape Town, South Africa, which is not where I live. Or have. I spent 3 months here 7 years ago. That's the closest I know it. It's a very hard lockdown here, but it means I have lots of time to watch films and do Zoom calls. That's
so
silver line.
I was wondering, could you tell us just a little bit about the festival's history to get started? Because it's associated with Human Rights Watch, who are an organisation who look at human rights issues, funnily enough, the world over. What role does the film festival play within that organisation? How did it come about?
So we've been actually going for 31 years in New York. Was our 24th edition in London, and we've been part of the organisation in the sense that we're using a lot of the tools and resources, the expertise of our researchers, but we are curating films externally. So none of these are made by Human Rights Watch employees, or we're operating like a film festival that gives the opportunity for the members of the public to engage with the human rights issues beyond just the film. So we see our festival as, yes, there are these screenings, but they're part of events. So we have this around 30 minutes after each screen to really deep into the topics. So yeah, we've been a complementary arm of Human Rights Watch in that sense, that we can bring in the work that's already being done and often not getting enough press, remote corners of the world, or issues that journalists aren't particularly touching right now, and we really bring them to the fore with a different way of communicating and interacting with information, really.
And I was wondering, how was the decision made, and what was the process about transitioning to doing it fully online? Certainly for the London one, because certainly on the basis of what you've said there, and from what I can see about the program that's planned, audience participation and Q&As and like being actually to be able to engage with the issues that the films bring up is so important. So how did the team go about trying to recreate that as best as possible in this kind of digital online environment?
Yeah, I mean, as everyone knows, it's so much of an unknown right now. I think the film industry has been impacted in the sense that no one is going to the films, no one is going, engaging with other people, having dialogue in person, being able to really see this as a group experience, which is what we love about the festival and what we're excited. I mean, we work with the Barbican, Regent Street Cinema, and Curzon. We're going to be at Curzon Soho, and they're incredible partners. We each bring our audiences there. We're trying to reach people who've been directly impacted by the issue, or maybe people that know about Human Rights Watch, maybe people that know about the film, and then the cinemas are really able to bring cinema going audiences who just love good films. So it's a really beautiful room that we have together. So it's a real shame to lose that this year, and we look forward to bringing that back next year. But for this year, we had these amazing films, these amazing filmmakers. We had panels already set. I mean, we literally closed the festival. I think we announced it the day after opening night. So we had our opening night. This was like the worst time in terms of March. I mean, no one had any idea what was going on. No businesses had closed, or events had really cancelled, besides, I think, the London Book Fair at that point. So we had a lot of this work that we didn't want to go to waste. And actually this opportunity with Curzon Home Cinemas meant that these films could be seen beyond just the London metropolitan area. I mean, this is viewable across the UK and Ireland. And we are still doing a Q&A for each film, actually. So we have, which can extend longer than 30 minutes. And so we just hosted one very recently for a film called Crypt Camp that's on Netflix that you should all go see, or sit and see. And it really offers that space when people are in the comfort of their own home to see this conversation unfold, but also interact. So we do dedicate quite a large portion of that Q&A to audience questions that we're collecting from the chat. So there's still that dialogue going on. And then we're posting the videos online for people to further engage. So we're really hoping that actually this will reach more people. And accessibility wise, I mean, I think we're often trying to think about how audiences with disabilities might be able to engage with our films and conversations. And we're hoping again that if we're able to bring this to people's homes, this might offer new ways to engage with these titles.
Yeah, it's something I've been wondering. The more and more I see festivals and even just cinemas actually doing these online Q&A events, I'm wondering if this kind of enforced period of experimentation might make people pick and choose the bits that they actually think could work in the longer term. Because I think accessibility is such an important thing generally, but I think also for the type of films that the Human Rights Watch Film Festival is doing. In particular, there's a very, very accomplished body here in Scotland, Take One Action, who show similar sort of films, and a lot of the issues they bring up are very important. I think it's a great thing to be able to try and get it to more people. One thing I was wondering is, because you've got, for now anyway, this kind of non-traditional audience, in the sense that it's not a public gathering. You're not having quite the same person-to-person interaction. Did that affect at all which films were considered for the digital edition, or did the focus really just remain purely on the issues that the team want to highlight?
Yeah, so we're the same titles that we were going to show in our London edition. There's a few titles that we didn't include, and I'm amazed that we were able to work with so many titles and build a kind of mutually beneficial for our audiences and for the filmmakers situation. So because all of this is being semi-created at the point of idea, at this point, at the point of inception, I'm very impressed with all of our filmmakers, the film teams, Curzon Home Cinema, our partners at Barbican and Regent Street. I mean, everyone just kind of operated within such a small time frame to build what is extremely difficult for filmmakers to know navigate the ins and outs of rights. So there's how having your film online might impact your chances of being at another festival or having a broadcast deal. So we had to work out a lot of those question marks. And unfortunately, because we had such a small time frame, we weren't able to do that with every film. But I mean, out of 13 films, we have 9. One of them was already a Netflix film that was available on. So it's really about, I think proportionally good chunk of our program. So yeah, it definitely wasn't picking and choosing like which ones would suit this model more. So with each of the Q&As, we have you know, we've already built those relationships with the people who are on the panel, but we're going to do kind of chats beforehand, really share materials and offer this mutual points of interaction essentially for folks. But we can always take those conversations continued afterwards if people send questions via Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, where we'll be streaming as well.
Fantastic. I didn't know that about the that's an impressive ratio to get into the online edition. It's on a more general kind of programming note for the festival. Obviously, for the sort of topics that are being dealt with in the films, there's quite a lag between or for many of them anyway, there could be quite a lag between beginning the film as a production and then actually having a finished, comprehensive story, I suppose is the way you put it. How does that factor into the choosing of the films? I mean, independent of anything to do with them going online or anything like that, just purely because a lot of these things will have faded from the headlines perhaps by the time you get a quality film about them. Is it done purely just on the basis of the quality of the film, or do you also try and look for topics that have maybe faded from the public consciousness to say, look, this is still an issue, and here's a wonderful piece of storytelling that shows you why? So I'm just wondering about, because obviously there must be a huge amount of human rights issues cropping up right now, like at the minute we're speaking. But in terms of documentary film that will display that, it might not show up for 2, 3, maybe even longer number of years. So how does that lag play into the selection process?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because I think it's such a difficult task to ask filmmakers to make, you know, just like kind of rapid response documentary films that will be engaging, entertaining, and informative, that, you know, are over 60 minutes, which is usually what we show, kind of feature length films. So, but the sad thing is that a lot of the information, the lessons learned, the messages are last quite long. They still have impact on a society or a group of people today. So, you know, it might cover an event. I'm just thinking of Radio Silence, the film about a Mexican journalist, a female journalist who's, it covers, I think in 2015, there's a scandal, and then continues a couple of years afterwards. But even right now, the issues that she's dealing with, the shutdown of independent press, the attacks on people who speak out against different governments. It can be external to Mexico, where people find relevancy and that we're able to bring out in those Q&As. So you actually end up with, so we are looking for films, yes, that touch on an issue that is pertinent, it's extremely important right now, even if it's not in the headlines. But it might be that it's the long tail of those issues that really, really have relevance. So sorry, that's a long answer, but I think it is a combination. Really, they have to be good films. I mean, we watch them with an eye of what our audience is going to respond to, as well as what we think is important. You know, the theatrical festival-ready films, which is what's also pretty exciting about the festival, is that always kind of new films that are just coming out on the circuit, and that film reviewers also want to take a look at, and film lovers also want to see. So it's not just sectioned off to people who are passionate about human rights.
Yeah, in particular, I'm quite pleased because I've managed to get a hold of some of the films to review them ahead of the festival and pass them on to, with my other hat on, editor of Take One. And I think something that strikes me about the films, and even looking at some films that have screened at previous editions that I've then seen pop up on the festival circuit, is they are very much, they're generally in more of a storytelling documentary. It's not really they're not typically, you know, a journalistic talking heads type scenario, which I mean, obviously there's journalistic content, right? But it's more about painting a picture and telling a story, because I think that's how people sometimes best engage with these things. and that certainly seems to be the
Absolutely,
approach
yeah.
that's taken with the films at the festival. I suppose, what does beyond this year, what does the situation look like? Because obviously this is very upended, and you've done a fantastic job of getting as many of the films as possible into this digital edition. Will you look at trying to do partner screenings for the other ones? Will this... I'm not going to say will this return to normal, because obviously I don't think either of us can answer that question, right? But or do you think you will be approaching how you put on the festival and the preparations for it quite differently next year, I suppose?
A very good question. I think it's so difficult to know. I mean, just as a comparison, so we usually go straight from our London edition to, we finalize our program for New York directly afterwards, and we move forward with this big New York edition that's in June. We had more of a warning time before, and not just after opening night, that we realized it was. So we actually are doing all of our New York edition online as well. So we have 11 films screening online in just a few weeks. And obviously having that prep time makes it a little easier. We're able to host our own films. They live on a platform where people can find out a lot more information about Human Rights Watch, and that's available across the US. I think also the fact that we're able to bring in people on that panel from different corners of the world, and the environmental impact of that is much reduced when you're doing it over the internet rather than in planes. So I think that will likely bear an impact. I think, so yeah, expanding the audience and expanding the people that we have on those conversations, I think will likely take into account. I mean, the reality is that producing a film festival, whether it's online or in person, is a lot of work. And I think we'll have to just look at, like, how did this reach as many people as we wanted? Did people tune in at that time? And this time next year, will people be done with online content, or they only want to be in person? We don't know. So yeah, I think it's going to take a lot of reflecting over the summer, and just keeping our eyes on, obviously, the situation happening in each country, each city, to know next steps. It's very hard to predict.
Yeah, so thank you. It's really fascinating to hear how festivals are coping with this current situation, what might carry forward into the future, and just how all those priorities are being juggled. If you can just finish off with it, when is the festival running online? Like, when are the majority? Because there's Q&A events associated with the films, which are available on Curzon Home Cinema and various other sources. So what are the dates for that?
So May 22nd to June 5th is when the window that you can see the films. And then what we've done is kind of staggered out the Q&As into a program, so you're not having to watch them all at once, and you can engage with all of them or some of them as you wish. And we have a lineup of all of those Q&As on our film festival website, which is ff.hrw.org, and you can look at each film. You can register ahead of time, which will send you a reminder when our events are. It's free, obviously, and then we will be also streaming to Facebook Live from the Human Rights Watch account for each of those days.
Fantastic.
They will have closed captioning available for audiences who are deaf or hard of hearing.
Fantastic. So we'll put some links to that on the Cinetopia social channels, and also Take One and Cinetopia will probably be reviewing some of the films as well, so keep an eye out for that. Right. It looks like an excellent program, a lot of great issues being brought up, and what look like a lot of excellent films.
Thank you so much, Jim.
Yep, thank you for speaking with me. Take care.
All right, take care.
So finally, we will be doing our review review of our short films that are available, hopefully online. I think I just checked to make sure if mine was. And as common practice here, we try to be very short and succinct with our review, or our to 1 minute exactly, which has been put upon us to try, supposedly by Carice, but Jim doesn't want to take ownership.
No, not supposedly by Carice. Definitely by Carice. I am merely the enforcer.
Right. The enforcer he is. So in any case, I do want to try to do this every time. I think it's fun. We're all into short films, so I'm gonna let our newest contributor, Elle, start it off with her short film.
Sweet, 1 minute. Let's try this. So yeah, actually very short, very little I can say about this short. Is This Perfect Day by Lydia Rui. And as captioned, a rebellious teen walks into a music store and it may change their life forever. It starts out with the premise of heading into a music store and trying out some instruments, kind of walking around a little bit superstitiously, kind of eyeing up the cash register a little bit, but leads into a much more surprising story than you would expect. It was championed at Melbourne, Real Good Film Festival, Flickerfest, and debuted at Tribeca. You can catch it on YouTube, Vimeo, and Omeletto. And Lydia Rui is a really great upcoming director, and she has a lot of potential. This is a really, really lovely film. Highly recommend, so go check it out.
All right. And exactly a minute as well, so
Yes.
There you go.
All right, so I will go next, if that's okay. Last time mine was only like 15 seconds, but the film was only 3 minutes. So the film I'm suggesting is a film called Stutterer, that was an Irish film, and it won many awards in 2015, including the Academy Award for Best Short Film. It's about a gentleman named Greenwood who is a lonely typographer, but he also has an online girlfriend, and he has a stutter, and he's nervous about meeting the online girlfriend in person when she suggests that they meet, because she might not like him anymore. And so I really think the film goes into just sort of that process of, online communication and connection and what happens when you meet in person. And I thought it was really sweet. A story about connection and love, and also feeling your insecurities about yourself. So I recommend it. It's online. We'll send you the link.
Okay. I didn't time you, but
Oh,
I think
thanks.
it was fine. Yeah. Well, I don't want to get accused of being like, a taskmaster
I want to
here.
be challenged.
I'm
just
developing
like the
a
rest.
reputation.
I want to be challenged just like the rest.
Right. Well, I'll keep to my own rules. So the short film I am recommending this month is Coyote by Laurence Wunderla. It's a film which went round a lot of festivals. I saw it at the Edinburgh Short Film Festival. It's an animation which follows a coyote in the aftermath of his wife and child being killed by wolves. It is a very, I think, trippy is probably the adjective that most people would probably use watching this. It's an animation, and as with so many animations, it is wildly inventive, super colourful, and really quite touching in places as well. So it's quite mental, but it's well worth checking out, and it just shows great imagination from start to finish. And it's available on Vimeo, so we'll pass the link on.
That's good. You used, I think, 50 seconds there, so well done. So next time we are going to do we tried to set this up, but next time we will be watching the film that Mark Nelson, another contributor of ours, had challenged us to, The Task. So everyone on the show next in 2 weeks will review that. But we welcome you to find it. We'll put a link down here online as well, for you to watch it. So maybe you can comment back. And we really ask that you let us know what you think in terms of our debate that we had today about the films that we watched. Or you can always email us at cinetopiashow@gmail.com, or message us via social media. We're at Cinetopia on Twitter, and at Cinetopia Hub on Instagram and Facebook. So that's it for the show, and thank you to Elle and Jim for being part of this today, and we hope to see you very soon for the next one.
Thanks for having me on board.